I was walking along Cannery Row just after sunrise, the sea air thick with salt and the distant cries of gulls bouncing off the storefronts. The tourists hadn't arrived yet, only the soft hum of delivery trucks and the rhythmic hush of waves against the rocks. I almost didn't see the box, small, damp, wedged behind a trash bin near the edge of the pier. It looked ordinary, just another bit of litter after the night. But then, something inside shifted. At first, I thought it was the wind playing tricks, until I heard it. A faint, broken whimper. My heart stuttered. I knelt, peeled back the wet cardboard, and froze. A tiny French Bulldog puppy, barely 2 months old, curled into himself like he was trying to disappear. His white fur was matted with grime, speckled with sand and oil. Beneath his trembling body was a folded note, smudged with rain. I could barely read the words, "Please take care of him. I can't anymore." For a moment, the whole world went quiet. The gulls, the ocean, even my breath, all muted by the sight of this fragile little creature trying to survive in a box. I slipped my hands beneath him, feeling the shiver of his bones against my palms. He didn't resist, didn't even look up, just pressed his head weakly against my thumb as if hoping I wouldn't let go. The sea breeze turned colder then. I pulled him close to my chest and whispered, "You're safe now, little one." But in truth, I didn't know if he was. He was so light in my hands it barely felt real, more like lifting a bundle of damp cloth than a living thing. I tucked him inside my jacket as I hurried along the quiet Monterey streets, past the old cannery buildings where salt clung to the windows and the scent of fish lingered in the air. His breathing was shallow, a faint rattle against my chest. Every few steps I glanced down, terrified the sound would stop. I ducked into my truck and wrapped him in an old beach towel I kept behind the seat. His body trembled uncontrollably, paws twitching as if from some nightmare he couldn't escape. Under the grime, his fur was ghost pale, the soft folds of his face hidden beneath a crust of dirt. I turned up the heat, whispered nonsense. Anything to keep him tethered here with me. At a red light, I risked a closer look. His tiny ribs rose and fell unevenly. When I brushed a finger near his nose, he made a sound so faint I almost missed it, a sigh, maybe, or the smallest plea. I wanted to drive faster, but the streets were slick with morning mist, and every second stretched like wire. By the time I reached the animal clinic near Lighthouse Avenue, his breathing had slowed again. I lifted him, towel and all, and ran. Inside, the smell of disinfectant hit me like a wall. A nurse looked up, startled, then urgent. As I stumbled toward the counter, "Please," I managed. He was left in a box by the pier. They took him from my arms the moment I reached the counter. The towel was soaked through, and I could still feel the warmth of his tiny body fading against my palms. The vet, a young woman with tired eyes and steady hands, disappeared through the swinging doors without another word. All I could do was stand there, dripping sea mist onto the white tile, heart pounding in the hollow quiet. The minutes stretched endlessly. Somewhere behind that door, I heard muffled voices, short, urgent, then fading into the hum of machines. I caught fragments, dehydrated, severely malnourished, barely responsive. Every phrase hit like a wave against rock. I sank into a plastic chair and stared at my hands, still trembling. I hadn't meant to find him. I wasn't looking for anything that morning. But now, sitting there with salt on my sleeves and the smell of disinfectant burning my throat, it felt like the city itself had handed me a secret to keep. When the vet finally returned, she carried him wrapped in a clean blanket. His face was still pinched with exhaustion, but there was a softness to his breathing now, steadier, less desperate. She told me they'd given him fluids and glucose, that he'd need warmth, rest, and time. I reached out to touch his paw, so small it barely curled around my finger. He didn't open his eyes, but his body relaxed at the contact, as if somewhere deep inside he recognized safety. "He's a fighter," she said quietly. I nodded, though part of me wasn't sure if she was talking to me or herself. That night, I couldn't leave him. The clinic had closed hours ago, but they let me stay in the corner room, a small space lit by the steady pulse of a heat lamp. The puppy lay curled in a soft blanket, his breathing faint but rhythmic, like a fragile song trying not to fade. Outside, the sound of waves crashed against the Monterey shore, muffled by the glass. Inside, everything smelled of antiseptic and salt. I sat beside him on the cold floor, afraid that if I looked away, he might simply vanish. Every so often, he'd twitch, a small, involuntary motion that reminded me he was still here. I whispered stories to him about the sea lions on the pier and the old fisherman who whistled at sunrise. It felt absurd, talking to a creature who couldn't even lift his head, but it kept the silence from swallowing me. Around midnight, the vet came in to check his IV. She smiled softly, almost surprised. "He's stabilizing," she said, slowly. Her voice carried that cautious hope I'd learned to distrust in my own life, the kind that could break you if you held it too tight. When she left, I noticed his ear twitch toward my voice. Just a flicker, but real. I leaned closer, whispered, "You hear me, little one?" His nose shifted slightly, a faint whine slipping out. It was the smallest sound, but it cracked something open in me. For the first time all day, I felt warmth spread through my chest, not from the heat lamp, but from the stubborn will of a creature who refused to give up. By morning, the air in the clinic had turned cool and still. The sun was rising over the ocean, sending pale gold light through the blinds. I hadn't slept. Every rustle from his blanket had kept me awake, counting each breath like a prayer. When I finally leaned in, I saw it. His eyes were open. Not fully, just enough for a sliver of brown to catch the light. He blinked once, then twice, as if the world around him felt too bright to trust. "Hey there," I whispered. My voice came out rough, almost breaking. I held out a finger and slowly, painfully slowly, he lifted his tiny head. His tongue, dry and trembling, brushed my skin. It wasn't even a lick, more like a question. "Are you real?" The vet came in and smiled. "He's responding. He might try to eat later today." She checked his IV and adjusted the blanket around him. "You're doing good, little man," she said softly before leaving us again. I sat there watching him for what felt like hours. When I spoke, he followed my voice with his eyes. Every tiny gesture felt monumental, the twitch of a paw, the flick of an ear. I brought a bowl of water closer, dipped my fingers in and let droplets fall on his lips. At first, nothing. Then, after a pause, he began to lap at them weakly. It was such a small act, so ordinary, yet it felt like witnessing a miracle. The box by the pier, the freezing wind, the note, all of it blurred behind me. For the first time, survival didn't feel impossible. It felt like a choice he'd made. Over the next few days, I made the clinic my second home. Between my shifts at the marina, I came straight here, sometimes with salt still on my jacket and the smell of diesel clinging to my hands. Each time, I found him a little different. His breathing stronger, his eyes clearer. The frail creature I'd found in that box was starting slowly to take shape again. They'd shaved parts of his coat where the dirt had clung too deep, revealing pale, tender skin underneath. I'd sit beside him with a warm cloth, gently wiping what was left of the grime. He'd squirm a little now, protesting in that quiet, grumbly way only bulldog puppies can. It was the best sound I'd ever heard. One evening, as the sun dipped low and the clinic lights softened, I placed a small bowl of food near him. The vet had said not to push it. He'll try when he's ready. I waited, silent, heart pounding. He sniffed, uncertain, then took one tiny bite, then another. By the third, he was chewing slow but steady, eyes half closed in concentration. I couldn't stop smiling. For days I'd been living between fear and hope, and now, right in front of me, life was choosing to begin again. When he finished, he gave a quiet, satisfied sigh and rested his chin on my hand. His warmth sank into my skin, solid, present, alive. I looked down at him and whispered, "You're tougher than you look, little guy." For the first time, I saw the faintest wag of his tail, hesitant but real, and it nearly broke me. Like the clinic staff started calling him the miracle pup. But to me, he was just him, this tiny white French bulldog with the stubborn will to live. I spent every break at his side, and he'd begun to recognize the sound of my steps before I even reached his room. His ears would perk up, eyes searching the air like he already knew I was coming. That morning, the vet smiled when she saw me walk in. "He's ready to go home," she said. I froze. I hadn't expected those words, not yet. She handed me a folder with his meds, feeding schedule, and a reminder that he'd need constant care. But I barely heard her. All I could think about was the box by the pier, how far we'd come from that. I wrapped him in the same towel I'd found him in, now clean and soft. He nestled against my chest, his head tucked under my chin, breathing slow and steady. Outside, Monterey was alive again, children laughing near the aquarium, the ocean scent thick in the breeze, seagulls swooping low over the parking lot. As I carried him to the truck, I caught our reflection in the window. A man and a fragile life he never meant to find, now inseparable. He looked up at me then, eyes bright and questioning, and I felt something shift inside. "You need a name," I said quietly. I thought of the note, of the storm that almost took him, of the tide that brought us together. "How about Tide?" He tilted his head as if weighing it, then gave a soft snort, a tiny, approving sound. That was all the answer I needed. Bringing Tide home felt both fragile and sacred, like carrying the last flame of a candle through the wind. My apartment overlooked the harbor, small and cluttered, with the sound of waves filtering through the windows. I laid him on a folded blanket near the heater, half expecting him to tremble the way he used to. But he didn't. He stretched, gave a sleepy grunt, and fell into the kind of deep, peaceful sleep I hadn't seen from him yet. The next few days blurred into a rhythm of care. Feedings every few hours, tiny walks across the living room, soft words whenever he whimpered in his sleep. He followed me everywhere now, waddling behind on uncertain legs. Each step looked like an argument with gravity, but he refused to stop trying. One morning while I was making coffee, I heard the scrape of claws on tile. I turned and saw him standing, really standing, on his own, his little chest puffed out, legs trembling like saplings in the wind. He looked up at me, eyes wide, as if surprised by his own courage. I dropped to my knees, laughing through tears I didn't expect. "Look at you," I said. He took one unsteady step forward, then another, before tumbling into my hands. The ocean breeze carried through the open window, bringing the scent of salt and life. I wrapped him close and whispered, "You made it home, Tide." He looked up, blinked slowly, and pressed his nose against my chin. A small, perfect gesture that said everything words couldn't. Weeks passed, and Tide was no longer the trembling bundle I'd pulled from that box. His coat had turned soft again, pure white with a faint cream glow in the sunlight. He had energy now, real, uncontainable puppy energy. And every morning began with him pawing at my blanket, demanding attention before the coffee had even brewed. We took our first walk together along the same pier where I'd found him. The gulls were circling above, the boards damp from ocean spray. Tide trotted ahead on his tiny leash, stopping every few feet to sniff, to stare, to greet strangers with that clumsy confidence only puppies have. People smiled when they saw him. No one could imagine the fragile creature he'd once been. I knelt by the spot where the box had been, now empty, except for a few scraps of driftwood. Tide padded over, sniffed the ground, then looked back at me. It was a small moment, but it carried the weight of everything. The fear, the nights in the clinic, the waiting, the whispers of maybe. "You remember, don't you?" I said softly. He tilted his head, tail wagging slow, uncertain. A wave broke nearby, spraying mist over us. He barked, one sharp, joyous sound, then ran in circles, kicking up sand. I laughed out loud, unable to stop. For the first time, the sound didn't echo against emptiness. It filled the air and stayed. When he finally collapsed against my leg, panting and proud, I looked out at the ocean and thought about how healing doesn't come in grand gestures. Sometimes it arrives on 4 small paws, covered in salt and sunlight. By spring, the ocean air had grown warmer, and Tide had doubled in size. Sturdy, bright-eyed, always chasing the wind. Every day he surprised me. The same puppy who once fit inside my hands now bounded across the sand like he owned the shoreline. People stopped to pet him, to ask his name, and every time I said it, something in my chest softened. We had our routines now. Morning walks by the harbor, lazy afternoons on the porch where he'd nap with his head on my shoe. At night, when the city quieted and the smell of salt drifted through the open window, he'd curl beside me, his breath slow and even, the rise and fall of it sinking with the tide itself. Sometimes I'd think back to that morning, the box, the note, the shaking bundle that barely clung to life. I remembered how small he'd been, how fragile. But now when he looked at me with those warm brown eyes, I saw something else. Trust. Not the trembling kind born of fear, but the deep, steady trust of a soul that finally knows its home. One evening we walked back to the pier at sunset. The sky burned gold and rose, the water reflecting every hue. Tide sat beside me, ears flicking in the wind. I reached down and scratched behind his neck, feeling the smooth curve of his collar, the one engraved with his name. "You saved me too, you know," I said quietly. He turned, pressed his head against my leg, and for a long moment, neither of us moved. The waves rolled in and out, the same rhythm that had carried us both here, not by chance, but by grace.